Is this? How do we strike the right balance between more generous paternity rights and employees doing their jobs?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 2. A man armed with an axe in Hamburg has been shot by German police. It happened just a few hundred yards from the Euro 2024 fan zone. The medal was paid homewards in the city this afternoon. Joe Wilson is in Germany covering the tournament.
The police have just released a statement confirming that police officers were threatened by a man with a pickaxe and an incendiary device. The police then used their firearms. The attacker was injured and is currently receiving medical treatment in hospital. Videos posted on social media by fans in the area show armed police dispersing thousands of supporters from the Reeperbahn in Hamburg.
General Secretary of UNICEF has told LBC Labour's manifesto is not ambitious enough. Christina Albanese says she understands there is a difference between the political party and the union. Most good have asked her what she would like to see.
Expect that we're to get money for some of the compensation funded, but we would like to see perhaps a bit more driven when it comes to looking at tax in Wales and when Labour's not doing that.
The Tories say it's all still to fight for, despite another poll predicting a huge loss of seats in July. The Health Trust says that with Dem plans for the NHS show a marginally bigger spend than either Tory or Labour, the SNP says it will do it.
Found closed long delays due to weekend roadworks. That's from junction 12 at Field to junction 11 at Reading, Shoreham by Sea in West Sussex, the A27 up Brighton Road westbound to Boat.
The man who disappeared. The local second senior lines, itself starts updating. Before that, on Radio 4, we've got gardening questions. We've got the answers.
Hello and welcome to Gardener's Question Time with me, Peter Gibbs. This week from small but perfectly formed central Oxford, where guests of Trinity College slap bang in the city centre. But Oxford has so much more to offer than mortarboards and gowns. The perfect juxtaposition between rural and urban, with the Cotswolds to the left and London to the right. Oxford boasts a green belt that surrounds the city, meaning plenty of open space in every direction. Oxford is also home to Britain's oldest botanic garden, Oxford Botanic and Arboretum, going back more than 400 years and packed full of fascinating plants and trees. It's also where we found the garden's deputy director and head of science and one of our regular panellists, Dr. Chris Thorogood, lurking in the shrubbery. We'll be visiting Chris at Oxford Botanic later in the programme. But joining Chris here on the panel are two more reasons for us to visit Oxford today. From the Cotswolds to the left, it's garden designer Chris Beardshaw, and from Hertfordshire to the right, via Lancashire, it's plantswoman Christine Walton. Your green belt and braces Gardener's Question Time panel. Here at the De Jager Auditorium at Trinity College, Oxford, who has our first question, please.
My name is Henry Reid Evans from Oxford and the Trap Grounds Association of Allotment Holders. Maybe this is marriage guidance that I'm asking for, but how do I persuade my husband that our plot would be much more productive if he spent less time speaking to nearby allotment holders and more speaking to our plants?
Chris Thorogood, you talk to your plants from the botanic garden?
Occasionally I've been able to talk to a plant. So, I mean, plants are, we think of them as inanimate beings, but they're surrounded by green music, by bird song and by vibrations. And actually on a sort of scientific level, if we think about bees pollinating flowers, the vibration that they produce has been scientifically shown to actually cause changes, for example, in how the pollen is released from a flower. So whilst I can't honestly sit here and say that talking to a plant is going to make it grow more, it certainly can't do it any harm, can it?
Chris Beardshaw, is your husband loud of voice?
Not especially.
The reason I ask is that building on what Chris was just saying about
plants being growing organisms and responding to their surrounding environments and so on. There is a growing body of evidence to suggest that sound will affect the way in which plants grow, but it has to be at a certain decibel level. And
Queen is good for plants.
and queen, as in the rock.
As in the rock. You say wall.
We have a consensus because if you speak or play music, Queen, to your plants and you're playing it around about 90 to 120 decibels, then it has been demonstrated to be beneficial, particularly to the growing part of the plant. That's to say, stem, leaf, promotes flowering and as a consequence fruiting and so on. So there is some evidence now, and you also have to make sure that your husband is speaking at a particular frequency, and so you need to make sure that if you're trying to germinate seeds, you need about 0.4 of a kilohertz. So that's sort of low-end classical music. If you are trying to get your tomatoes to grow and fruit successfully, you need about 0.8 to 8 kilohertz frequency. So frequency and decibel level are important in terms of what you're targeting and the effect that it's going to have. At the lower end, the 0.4 end, it's about germination, promoting seed growth, or seed germination, and at the higher end, it's about stimulating leaf and stem growth.
And once we've got a noise disturbance, your neighbours won't want to talk to him anyway, so.
They're at 90 decibels. Go for it on the allotment side. They'll love it.
I'll give it a go. Yeah, thank you.
Weed will rock you.
Very good.
We'll move on, shall we? Next question.
Hi, I'm Bridget from Kidlington. I've been growing my own veg for around 10 years now, but I'm yet to succeed with brassicas. The best I got was some very tiny Brussels sprouts, which my children thought were peas. I did actually serve them up, but they didn't eat them. Any top tips at all?
Christy, they're not the easiest vegetable, are they?
Yes and no, there are worse. One of the key things with brassicas is they need very firm planting. When I was young, I happened at an allotment, and there was a guy that used to walk around with a sledgehammer over his shoulder quite often at planting time. And one day he came on and was stood watching on the plot, and he said, "You don't plant them like that, lads." I said, "Oh." He said, "No, they won't grow like that, lads." He said, "This is what you do." And he came over to me plants and he thumped the ground around all my brassicas with this sledgehammer. And heck, did I have a good crop that year? And it's interesting because I'm now growing on a light alluvial loam and I can't get it firm enough. And I have a job actually getting it compact to produce decent sprouts. I produce reasonable sprouts, but they're not firm. And they're nowhere near as good as when I'm on the heavy soil. So I think actually very firm planting, keeping them well watered. I think it's a myth that you can allow brassicas to dry out and they'll go on to be productive. I think they need to be in continuous growth. So if we hit a dry spell, actually water them well. But I think the key thing is very firm planting. I mean, what was often suggested was that planting, that if you can actually pull the plant and you rip the leaf of the plant off, it's planted firmly enough. If you pull the plant out, it's not planted firmly enough.
That sounds like the secret. Find somebody with a sledgehammer. Thanks, Bridget. Over here.
Tony Cooper from Minchinhampton in the Stroud Valleys in Gloucestershire. I'm a great Brunnerer fan, but my wife Sylvia, who's a straight-talking Lancastrian, Christine, will not tolerate them in the garden because she finds them dull and ugly. Which variety of Brunnerer might I choose to win her over?
Okay, more marriage guidance.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah. What about our designer, Chris Beardshaw? What's your opinion on Brunnerer?
I think Brunner is a great plant. I think it's one of those plants that, it's very early into growth, so you get a lovely, fresh, green, unfurling leaf from a tight, compact clump. Prefers to be in that kind of dappled shade of a woodland environment, enriched with lots of organic matter, but not overly fertile. Wonderful getting up like balloons, and then the blooms are of course covered by the foliage as it unfurls, and it presents itself in the same way from a structural and aesthetic perspective as a hosta, without any of the issues of slugs and snails. So I think it's got an enormous amount to offer. I have to say that the one that I always go back to as an absolute fail-safe, because it has the energy and the enthusiasm to grow well, and it flowers well, and it produces a wonderful dappled leaf, is Brunnera Jack Frost. And Jack Frost is one of those ones which has just a sort of paint splatter, but it's not like a nasty variegation. There are some which are best avoided, which look as though they've been sort of, you know, margined with a kind of Tipex pen or something. You know,
She's going to be cringing at the back as you say this.
Don't like those. Don't avoid those. But Jack Frost is just politely decorated. It looks as though there's a sort of all the garden fairies have just tiptoed over it.
It's silver, isn't it?
It's got a
it's a lovely thing.
yeah.
Chris Thorogood, are you a fan? I'm guessing that might be a no.
Well, I became more of one listening to Chris's lovely description just there. There are other things I like more. Maybe, Tony, you could tell us a bit more about the area, the space that you're growing.
We've got a series of terraces coming down a steep Stroud Valley.
Okay.
And we've got a lot of space where ground cover would make sense. It's a big and awkward area, and so I've always suggested Brunnera to Sylvia, and she's not having it.
Christy, I think your fellow Lancastrian is sitting up there at the back with arms still folded, looking unconvinced, I think. Yes, so can you do a conversion?
Well, the begonias, of course, the elephant ears. Now, that's another plant that sort of is often considered as being dull and boring and old and yuck. But there's some spectacularly new varieties, and the colour forms have changed considerably. We've now got everything from white through to the pale pinks through to the dark magentas. The foliage colour can be good in the spring as well as in the autumn, and they are early flowering plants that good for pollination as well as good for colour. Many of the lamiums would be grown, the dead nettles, and people tend to think of the old varieties and have forgotten to look at the more newer varieties of a lot of things. And some of the newer varieties are well worth seeking out, and we don't tend to find them in run-of-the-mill garden centres, but they tend to be plants that we see on plant stalls and plant sales and going off into specialist nurseries, and they are really well worth it. And I'm sure that you could pick a selection of lamiums, of Gugas, the woodruffs, that would look fantastic. I mean, Lamia Bavata, beautiful plant, growing to around about 30 centimetres high, with varies with strawberry pink through to almost burnt orange flowers. It's a spectacular lamium, but how often do we see it? We don't.
Poor old Tony's looking crestfallen now. You're not looking this close at all.
Tony, can I just a quiet word to make Brunnera's more exciting? Can we mix a few other things with it? So just here we go. Brunnera Jack Frost, okay?
Yeah.
Leucogyms, some early flowering leucogyms, an understory of the really kind of buttercup yellow celandines, then some chamaesyas, some bright blue chamaesyas coming through, brilliant for just sort of naturalising. Then some bluebells, they'll be out a little bit later. Then you'd have your Narcissus lobularis coming through, and also some honesty. So you've got ground cover, you've got spiky things, you've got texture, you've got different colours. I mean, that right there, that's a Chelsea winning garden right there. So
Here's a smile at the back.
just try that.
Sneak them in amongst all these.
Try that little combination out and see what the response.
That sounds good.
Good luck with the drive home.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Let's move along.
Hello, I am Jack's Motion. I live in Kennington. I don't actually have a garden, but I do have pots outside my kitchen window, and I like growing herbs because I cook a lot. And I would like to grow some dill. I've never grown dill. I've never seen a dill plant. Does it have to grow from seed? And can I start them off inside? Can you just give me a bit of advice if I be successful with growing dill?
Not that we get asked about growth.
Lovely question, Jax. And dill is a wonderful plant to grow in a pot and also in the bed, actually. So you said you don't have beds, but for our listeners, it's a great plant that you can grow as if you're growing a sort of something in a herbaceous border, because it's a beautiful thing. It's in the Apiaceae family, the umbellifers, as we used to call them, which is the carrot family. And one of its close relatives is fennel, and it actually looks very much like fennel. But it's perhaps a little bit more, it's a slenderer plant, I'd say. It's got the same very much divided feathery foliage, but unlike a fennel, perhaps it's more what we'd say glaucous or glaucous, so it's got a sort of whitish blue cast over the leaves. It's a beautiful thing with these umbels, once it's ready, of yellow flowers. So it's a wonderful plant in its own right. Now, dill is native, it grows in very dry environment, so think of a sort of Mediterranean regime. So you'd grow it just as you would grow a fennel plant. It will be very happy in a pot. Do you have plenty of sunlight in the area, Jackson?
Yes.
That's fantastic. It will be very happy there. So my only advice, really, other than to get going, is to make sure that it's got plenty of drainage. So I would be adding some grit or even some sand to the soil. So think of growing it like you would any other sort of sun-loving Mediterranean herb. I'd grow it in the warmest possible spot. You might think about staking it, because they do have a penchant for sort of flopping if it gets a bit too dry. But otherwise, it's really very easy. We grow them.
Your spouse's career and the family.
From the Wolvercote Horticultural Society, I've got an established everlasting sweet pea. It often gets mildew. How do I prevent that happening? It's on a south-facing wall, and at the moment it's looking very happy. But later in the season, last year, it got mildew, and I think possibly the year before. How do I prevent that?
Okay, let's see if we can get that sorted for you. Christine, they are a bit prone to that, aren't they?
They are, yes. I mean, and a lot of it relates to the soil moisture content and dryness at the roots, and also being against a wall or a fence makes for a fairly still environment. One of the suggestions is if you grow the plant, we'll have a batten system, so that the trellis or the support that it's going up is actually away from the wall and there's wind funneling behind. The other thing that's often suggested for trying to control it is a tablespoonful of bicarbonate of soda in 2 pints of water and spraying that on there. That sometimes works. Basically though, it's often the season that is a problem rather than anything else, and sweet peas, amongst other things, it's a little bit like honeysuckles. The dryness of the planting position often is inducive to the powdery mildew.
Chris Beardshaw, any other thoughts?
I think if you were starting from scratch, dig in lots of organic matter, dig very deeply, and that will help. If you've already got it in the ground, at the end of the season, make sure you clear away any fading leaf litter and also apply a very generous mulch of organic matter, and that will help to maintain that little carpet on top of the soil and resist the loss of moisture through the soil. Apart from that, as Christine said, just a light, open, airy environment, and just give it some space to grow. Don't overcrowd it. And once you get them growing, they're fantastic, and when they're performing, they're beautiful. But it's all about soil prep.
Moisture and ventilation seem to be the keys, Mary.
Yeah, that's good.
Thanks for that. Thanks for those answers, panel. More from the audience of Keene Gardens here in central Oxford soon. But regularly on this programme, we receive lots of questions and correspondence about bugs and beasties. As you can imagine, those queries concern the classics: slugs, snails, aphids and weevils. But gardeners tend to be a kind bunch, and it's not that we want to kill these creatures per se, we just want to deter them, ideally. However, one insect many listeners don't seem to have any sympathy for is the humble ant. Search for the word ant in the GQT email inbox and you'll find endless queries, whether it be an infestation in a potted fig, pointing the finger at ants munching potato crops, or root disturbances in raised beds. It seems there's very little love for these tiny creatures. So maybe it's time for an advocating for ants, courtesy of Dr. Chris Thurrigan.
Dr. Chris, as we are here in Oxford, it seems a shame not to come to Oxford Botanic Garden.
Yes, welcome to the garden, Dan.
Thank you very much. What we desperately need, Chris, is a little bit of ant PR, and I think you're the man for the job. Where are we?
I am. So we're standing sort of backstage in the Botanic Garden, Dan. So we're outside the Tropical Nursery House, and I'd like to show you one of our greatest botanical curiosities.
Ooh, I can't wait to see. Let's go in.
All right, follow me. Here we are. It's a bit warmer in.
Oh, that's a lot warmer in here. Yeah, that's lovely.
So, here we are, standing by the ant plant bench.
The ant plant bench, as I would say, as a Yorkshireman.
The ant plant bench, yeah, it sounds better that way. Now, we get lots of queries about ants, don't we, on GQT?
We do. Lots of concern queries. So people emailing in to tell us that they're convinced that the ants are destroying whatever crop they're growing, they're disturbing the soil, etc.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, really ants do very little direct damage to plants. So they can cause minor soil disturbance around plant roots. You see those little mounds that they form, and also on lawns, and that can be unsightly, I admit. And the other thing you may have noticed is ants farming aphids. So aphids feed on plant sap, and they secrete a little droplet of what's called honeydew, which is a very sugar-rich secretion. Now the ants enjoy that, and they'll do whatever they can to protect that from natural enemies, and that can allow the aphids to increase. But actually, in a wildlife-friendly garden, to be honest, ants can just be left alone. They're not really doing a huge amount of damage, you know, in the general scheme of things. But what we're looking at here, Dan, I promised you a botanical curiosity.
Yeah, this is like something out of Harry Potter. Describe this for us, Chris.
So I'm holding, this particular plant's called a Myrmecodia, and it's sort of bursting out of its pot. It's got this very much swollen, spiny, sort of sea urchin of a stem. And in their native range in Southeast Asia, ants actually nest inside this swollen stem that we're looking at here.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So if I was to slice this open, what we'd see is a labyrinth of hollow galleries, rather like honeycomb. And these connect to the outside world via a little entrance hole. There we go. Now, as every child who has prodded an ant's nest with a stick can attest, the occupants object violently to any intrusion. So out come the ants, arms waving, biting, stinging. Now, a resident ant army that behaves in this way can serve a plant such as this very well if their anger is directed towards a herbivore that might threaten the plant. So ants will stop at nothing to protect their home, and therein lies the foundation of a very special relationship that evolved between this plant and ants. Controls, accommodation, and the ants will stop at nothing to protect it. Now, ant plants such as this one have been cultivated here at the Botanic Garden for decades, and a good friend of mine called Guillaume Chimicki, he saw a very rare one called Squamularia in Fiji. It's related distantly to the one I'm holding now. Now, Guillaume hauled himself up into a tree, he tiptoed along the branches, and there he chased the ants. And his fascinating discovery, Dan, was this: the ants were farming the plants. I'll explain what I mean. Now, the ants harvest these seeds before any of the birds can discover them, and then they cart them off to little crevices in the tree's bark, and then they drag them into that crevice and effectively plant them and wait, and then a small group of worker ants patrols the germinating seedling, tends to it and protects it from harm. And then once the seedling has swelled to the size of about a fingernail, an entrance hole like the one we just examined expands on its surface, and then the ants can shuttle in and out of the plant, and they leave their droppings in the hallway of this plant, and that fertilises the seedling. And as the plant matures, it will then reward its occupant ants with droplets of nectar that only the ants know how to find. So it's an extraordinary relationship. This is the bit that I love the most. The ants farm specimens of different ages simultaneously, and unoccupied plants are always available to let when a new home is needed by the ants. So these ants are actually investing in real estate for future generations of ants. And this, of course, suits the plants perfectly.
So it's almost like successional planting, but for the ants.
Yeah, exactly. Ants are everywhere. And if we take the time to look a little closer, Dr. Chris Thorogood with GQT producer Dan at Oxford Botanic Gardens earlier today. You're listening to Gardeners Question Time on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds with me, Peter Gibbs. Joining Dr. Chris on the panel today are Christine Wharton and Chris Beardshaw. And we're with an audience of keen gardeners in central Oxford. Hello, audience. And which of you has our next question, please?
Hello, Jean Knight from Abingdon Horticultural Society. My Clematis montana, which was profuse, died in the drought and the awful winter a couple of years ago. What can I plant instead on an east-facing wall, small area about 3 foot wide, in front of the house?
So there's just nothing in there now, is there, at the moment?
Not at the moment.
Okay, we need to get it filled again for you. Chris Thorogood, let's start with you.
So it does get some sunlight, but not throughout the day, and not...
It gets morning sun, but it's shaded on the south side.
Okay. I mean, one option might be a passion flower, actually. I'm a big fan of Passiflora echeveria. It's a lovely thing because it always looks so happy, I always think. You know, when it's in leaf, it always looks sort of very vibrant. It doesn't really suffer with many pests and diseases. And then you've got those lovely flowers that, to me, smell for all the world like Ribena. Am I alone here? So the other thing, it's a little more effort. I would think about growing something as an annual, and you could do it each year. So I've just planted recently some minor lobata seedlings that they start off life looking like an Icomia when they come up, but they're very interesting tropical looking things, and they really get going. The other thing you could look at is a Rhodochyton atrasanguineum, but the seeds are tiny, they're like dust, and they do take a while to grow, so you'd want to start growing them quite early in the season. And I know we're only allowed one, Peter.
That's 3 and counting.
I know, three and counting. Okay, one more, but it's a good one. Cobea scandens, the cup and saucer plant, and it has these wonderful funnel-shaped flowers that, depending on the age of the flower, is either cream or purple. And honestly, everyone who passes by your east-facing spot with this climate will stop and inquire and wonder what that is. It will be the envy of the streets, I promise.
Chris, has he left one for you?
Possibly. Can I suggest Sephora as a good alternative? So Sephora flowers very early in the season, wonderful unfurling funnel-like yellow blooms that are slightly pendant. Quite a glaucous green foliage, very fine texture, almost fern-like. Technically it's not a climber, it's one of those kind of lazy shrubs which is very happy for you to just tether it against the wall and train it and strain it in all sorts of different directions. Having said that, it's not a handful. I would say Schizophragma would also be very good. That's one of the plants which is very similar to the climbing hydrangea, which, as I'm only allowed to mention one, I won't mention the climbing hydrangea, but that would, if I had more time, that would be another one that I would mention. And also Achebia as well, Achebia quinata. It's a bit like Gardeners Question Time when Pete says only one plant. We can squeeze 3 in.
Christine, I know when I'm beat. Go on.
And I'm going to go for 2. I would go with the Achebia, but instead of what Chris has suggested, I would actually put Dicentrus scandens up it. Now, Dicentrus scandens is a beautiful climbing, semi-herbaceous plant. In a shelter position, it will overwinter. In a bad winter, it will go down to ground, but it will come through. It produces beautiful, slimy, sort of olivey green foliage, but yellow flowers. The long flowering season, it will come into flowering in June. It will still be flowering in November. It's a delightful plant. It's not often seen. Something remarkably similar to that in its habit is a plant called Aglumina fungosa, and that produces foliage that's fern-like, slightly glaucous, so bluish foliage. It's more tender than the Dicentra, but if you was prepared to sow it from seed each year, you would keep it going, and that produces pink flowers. Both you don't often see and do really well. I've got the Achebia and the Dicentra in a tiny little spot at all on the north-facing wall, and it flowers it. It's a flipping good combination.
Spoiled for choice, Jane.
Thank you.
Got some decisions to make there. Thanks for your question. Let's take another.
Hello, I'm Dawn from Abingdon. What are the panel's recommendations for a good compost mix for pots to sustain them all summer? I'm really struggling with branded peat-free compost.
Chris Thorogood, I'm beginning to get to grips with peat-free now, but it has been a learning experience, and I think you do have to treat it in quite a different way, don't you, to get the best results.
You do, and I mean, my approach to this is initially quite systematic and scientific, so to understand what are the variables that are so how much sun do these plants get, which of the plants, and it sounds like, Dawn, you're talking about bedding plants. They're quite hungry feeders, and then it can be a case of working out with a given plant location and the soil that you've chosen, you find your way a little bit instinctively with what the watering regime, the feeding needs to be. So I would be thinking about the feeding regime, and there are different ways that we can feed plants, and this is the bit where I think it's good to be quite scientific about it. Most fertilisers will be what we call NPK, so there's a balance of nitrogen, potassium, phosphates, and depending on which side of the equation we are on the N, the P and the K, it has a different impact on the plant. So if we give too much nitrogen, it generates lots of leafy growth but not so much flower, and the other way around with the other two. I think you are probably going to have to feed them quite a lot to return to those lush, floriferous bedding plants that you want with the compost that you're using. So then I would think about how to fertilise these plants, and there are different ways we can do this. So one of them is we can use a slow release fertiliser, and there are many popular branded ones that you can use that you would sort of augment the soil with, that will release the fertiliser in a very slow, controlled and steady way throughout the soil. I would think about perhaps supplementing some sort of drainage or coarse grit or something into that compost as well, and seeing if that helps.
Okay.
Christy, it can be misleading, can't it? The top can dry out considerably, but down below it's still pretty wet.
Yeah, I think that we are seeing better quality and better materials marketed than we did initially. And I think the way forward is to keep trying different brands. And I also think we've just got to learn to change our way that we grew things. I mean, I know myself, in fact, I was watching some tomatoes this morning and thinking, Christine, it's not got any loam in it, you're going to have to keep them soggy. And I am naturally a soggy wet grower, just distinct from a dry grower. And I have got to teach myself not to be as free. And it is a case of using my natural water indicator, which is my finger, and stuffing it down the pot. Because, as Peter mentions, it can look dry on the top, but it's got a soggy bottom. And it's just re-education. I remember, and I'm sure my colleagues will remember, when we had to move away from soil-based feedage on in this compost and went into peat-free. For the first 2 or 3 years, we were making a mess of it, even commercially, and it took us a little while to find our feet. And I think we're at that stage again now. We are certainly getting better quality alternatives being sold to us on the Amster market, and I think that is the way forward. And they're not cheap. And it's worth looking at some more expensive ones than the very cheap ones for better quality, and the consistency is more similar to what we used to.
Chris, professional nurseries are great successfully in peat-free, aren't they, producing some really good plants. So it can be done, but it's just learning how to do it.
And you're absolutely right, it can be done, but it is a different mechanism in terms of watering and feeding, and the plants will respond in very different ways. Some will respond very positively to the more open, free-draining compost, some won't, especially those that like having their feet in either a firmer or a constantly moist compost. But I've stopped relying solely on a single bag of compost to go into a container. So go back to the good old days of mixing your own compost. For instance, as a really good example, a very simple recipe, take a bag of good quality peat-free compost, 50%, then add 40% topsoil. You can just buy a bag of topsoil from the nursery or garden centre, mix that together, then put in 10% grit, and then depending on the size of the container, a handful of chicken pellets. And there you go. You've got a compost compost which has all of the organic matter that the plants need and keep it free draining, organic matter holding onto nutrients, etc. You've got the solidity of the soil base in there. You've got the grit, which is going to aid the drainage, and then the chicken pellets will give you a slightly longer supply of nutrients. Of course, you've also got nutrients from that 50% of multi-purpose compost that you put in, or your peat-free compost that you put in. So make your own mix. We've been sort of lulled into a false sense of security that we can nip off to the nursery or garden centre, buy one bag, and one bag is going to serve all purposes. Let's get back to understanding what it is we're trying to do with that compost, and then tailor the little palette of materials and mix the compost to suit the environment and the plants. It's a much more successful way of doing it.
That's a good recipe, that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you.
Who has next question?
Angie Walter from the Rose Hill area in Oxford. I have over the years been seduced by a number of moisture-loving plants which are in the ground in my clay soil. Unfortunately, they can struggle in the hot summer months. Can I create a bog garden in a container? Would it need to have drainage holes? What else would I need to consider?
Christine, how would you go about it?
Basically, you need to fill a container with loam. Try not to have the loam too rich. You can, in fact, from aquatic centres buy loam that's specific for aquatic plants, and you need to keep that very moist. And that's a case of just careful observation. I've done this myself. I've never put drainage in there, and I've done all sorts of things in it. But you do need to keep an eye on it, particularly in the summer, because they will dry out very quickly. But you know, seeing things like the Troilluses, the Uvularias, the Calthas and plants like that growing successfully, Primula immensis and Primula bulliana, the Candelabra primulas can grow in that situation. You have to keep an eye on the moisture content.
Chris Benshaw?
Yeah, no problem with making a bog garden. You know, you're essentially just talking about a wet environment. As an example, I've got a section of my shed roof which is draining, filtering into a container, so there's a natural, ready supply of moisture, especially during the heat of summer. When we get you know, the strange wet stuff falling during the hottest moments of the summer, and so you've got this sort of constant drip going into a big galvanized tub, and in that I've got Iris sibirica, a number of varieties of Iris sibirica, Calthopilastris, which is a real beauty, and Equisetum, so the mare's tail. And collectively they create a wonderful bog garden environment, long flowering period, great textures, great colours, and much more interesting than just having an empty water butt into which the water is draining off of the roof. So almost by accident I've created exactly what you're trying to describe there, which is a wet container with moisture-loving plants in it.
I think it's a lovely question, Angie, and a couple more irises you might consider are Iris insata, which is a water iris, and also our own native Iris pseudacaris, which has the yellow flag iris. They might quickly take over depending on the size, so you might have to keep an eye on them. The other thing you could grow in a contained water environment is actually carnivorous plants. They need to be wet all the time, most of them, in the summer months. They're quite particular over the soil they need. We talked a lot about soil this episode, and you would need to investigate where you can biosustainably source a mix for those plants. You can't just put them in any old compost. That said, once you've done that, you can actually play about with the theatrics of this bog garden. And so one of the things you could do is take some, for example, some yogurt pots or ice cream tops or things like that, and upturn them, and then sculpt the compost around that so that you form these little hummocks that look exactly like a natural bog garden. And then the sorts of plants you could grow in there would be Darlingtonia californica, which is the cobra lily, which is an extraordinary looking thing, and it looks all the while like a nest of cobras sort of rearing their heads. It's a funny looking thing. It's a carnivorous plant. Sarracenia purpurea is also very cold hardy, one of the few in that group that is. And then we've got our own native plants, such as the sundews, Drosera rotundifolia. The key thing is not to top it up with tap water. They're quite sensitive about rainwater. But if you get to know their likes and dislikes, always rainwater, the right compost, and keep them always wet in the summer, they're actually not too difficult. And it will be the most wonderful self-contained environment that's both attractive and I think curious to look at. Good luck.
Lovely.
Sounds like you're going to have a lovely feature. Thanks, Ethel. And who has a final question, please?
Hi, so I'm Catherine from Lower Hayford, and I've got a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. The 4-year-old loves gardening, mainly things that can eat, but the 7-year-old has less interest. What project would you suggest to engage her with gardening as a family?
Christine, how can you enthuse this 7-year-old?
I think it's having plants that are easy to grow initially and quick to grow. So some of the salad crops, some of the annual crops, and things that are exciting. I mean, as a youngster, I can remember the first time I grew the sensitive plant, which is a house plant, and when it was about 3 inches high, I used to prop the leaves and the leaves fold up, and it's exciting. The worst thing you can do is give them a grotty area of the garden where it's weedy and they're going to be really suffering. Give them the very best area.
I think, those points of captivating interest, typically it's about watching the seed germinate. I've yet to meet a mature gardener who fails to be enlivened by watching something germinate and twist and turn, roots descend, shoots ascend, and so on. For all of us, there's something about the joy of life coming from an apparently inert object like a seed. So that's a good place to start. I think also if you can eat it, that helps. So grow a range of plants that are edible. The alpine strawberries, for instance, which are just packed with a punch of intense strawberry flavour. And there's something cheeky about it growing just overhanging a wall or dripping off a pot and just pinching this sort of fairy-sized fruit and nibbling it with its lukewarm during the summer months. I think there's also a sense of responsibility as well, which can draw people in. Give your kids an area of the garden to look after, or a plant to look after, and it becomes then a particular focus, almost like a pet. It's their particular area that they're responsible for. I think also the vulgar can very often interest us. I remember as a kid being fascinated by the voodoo lily. Well, it smells vile when it comes into flower. It fills the whole glass house, or the garden, the neighbourhood, whatever, with the most disgusting fragrance. I mean, it smells like rotting meat, and flies, cluster flies from miles around will be heading in your direction. So there's something kind of exciting about that. And so if none of that works, just pay them, just financial reward. I'll pay you to be interested in this, up to a point where you actually genuinely become interested. But I think those are the kind of the pathways to that level of engagement.
We did a small survey at Oxford Botanic Garden. The most popular plant among children, I don't know if anyone can guess. No, it was the pineapple plant that we grow in our glasshouses. And I think it's because they had no understanding of how a pineapple grows. Most people wouldn't if you'd never seen one growing before. And that's something that you can grow easily at home. So buy a pineapple, take the top off. You actually leave quite a lot of the top of the fruit on that pineapple sort of crown of leaves. Let it dry out on a sunny windowsill. You can leave it for days and it won't die. And then that bit of fruit will sort of peel away. And then you put that rosette of leaves in the soil, perhaps with a polythene bag over the top of a sunny windowsill. I've got one at home that's about 3 or 4 years old. And it's a lovely house plant. And it's a pineapple plant. One day I might grow pineapples for you.
Thank you very much.
I hope that's useful, Catherine. And good luck with enthusing your 7-year-old. Thank you. That's all we've got time for on this visit to Trinity College, part of Oxford University. Thanks to everyone inside the Jaeger Auditorium for looking after us so well, and thank you for listening at home. Next week, I'm back with another panel, this time from Hexham in Northumberland. Until then, from me, Peter Gibbs, the panel, Christine Wharton, Chris Beardshaw, and Dr. Chris Thorogood, it's goodbye, and may the weather be with you.
Question Time was produced by Dan Cocker. The assistant producer was Ronnie Prescott. It's a Something Else production.
Do you love jokes?
She likes jokes. I'm a big joke guy.
Do you find things funny?
I can tell that by looking at it.
Have you ever laughed?
I'm glad you find this amusing.
If you said yes to any of the above, BBC Sounds has got you covered.
What do you think?
There's Frank Skinner's One Person Found This Helpful.
The show where we look at online reviews?
Paul Merton's Room 101.
I don't like cats.
You don't like cows?
They seem to be everywhere.
And no such thing as a fish.
He just didn't want to wear socks anymore.
What a legend. Find your next comedy favourite. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Now on Radio 4, the latest of our special programmes celebrating the lives and works of George Orwell and Franz Kafka. In 15 minutes, our Kafka drama, The Man Who Disappeared. Before that, in Opening Lines, John York explores the enduring mystery and power of Kafka's dark, quiet, unfinished fantasy world.
As the 17-year-old Carl Rossman, who had been sent to America by his poor parents because a servant girl had seduced him and had a child with him, entered New York Harbor in the already slowing ship, he saw the statue of the Goddess of Liberty, which he had been observing for some time, as though in a sudden blaze of sunlight.
Carl Rossman, an abandoned teenager, treads the path taken by a million immigrants before. America, Ellis Island, the Statue of Liberty, a boy seeking in this new world a new home. He stares up at the mighty statue, overwhelmed by
her arm with the sword stretched upward as though newly raised, and the free breezes wafted around her.
Viewed in the dazzling sun, Carl sees Lady Liberty wielding not the fabled welcoming torch, but a more threatening sword. This is America, but not quite in the America we know. The opening lines of Franz Kafka's 1924 novel, The Man Who Disappeared, describe a country the author never visited, and indeed never existed. The perfect setting for Kafka's most straightforward, yet in some ways strangest work. Who is Carl? Where is he? Is liberty an ominous guardian, or an avenging angel, and has he reached heaven or hell? I'm John York, and this is Opening Lines, a BBC Radio 4 series that takes a look at books, plays, and stories that have made a mark and asks what makes them work. The Carl we first meet has been cast aside like an unwanted cat, punished for an offence for which his guilt is debatable, and so shamed he must leave the country of his birth. The emigre path he travels on would have been familiar to a million or more of his countrymen, indeed many of Kafka's own family too. But this trip to America lies somewhere on the page, and it's here that Kafka himself truly lived, away from his family, especially his overbearing father, away from work and his difficult relationships with women. Here he could sail free on the pages of his many journals, scribbling into endless insomniac nights. Kafka once told his long-suffering fiancée that he consisted with writing. The writing was both a way of making sense of the oppressive world he found himself in, see his novel The Trial, but also a means of escape. Professor Carolyn Duttlinger is a co-director of the Oxford Kafka Research Centre.
Kafka actually really hated Prague. While he's still at school, he describes Prague as a novel that has claws that she gets into you. Interesting maternal image here, of course. So there's absolutely a utopia of travelling. Kafka loved to travel as a young man all around Europe. There's definitely a sense of exhilaration of getting just away from it all, going west, making your own fortune in this place. That's why he decides to write a novel about America and not about what he knows. It's not a novel about everyday life. It's very much a travelogue. It's got a sort of futuristic element to it. Everything's on a huge scale. So we shouldn't ignore the excitement that's behind this as well.
This is Kafka's first attempt at a novel, and its genesis can be traced back to his teenage imaginings. Partly inspired by the picaresque misadventures of Dickens' David Copperfield, infused with the wary reports from socialist travelogues that conveyed both the brutal conditions of cities like Chicago alongside utopian promises of the West, America for Kafka proved endlessly fascinating. He knew of its promise from his relatives, in particular one cousin who had made good out there. But on top of that were the postcards of New York he avidly collected, and the movies of Charlie Chaplin, whom he loved. Chapman, then the world's most famous man, seeps into the book. Indeed, his films, particularly The Immigrant and The Gold Rush, seeded the myth of America, the land of promise, the man who disappeared, would gleefully play with and distort. These distortions are, of course, deliberate. Kafka fashions his own landscape with all kinds of miracles and oddities. There's a bridge from New York to Boston. San Francisco is in the wrong place. Every so often, through the canyons of streets, you catch a glimpse of striking workers. Eventually, a miraculous theatre for all humanity reveals itself, offering some kind of transcendent hope of equality. Or does it? Often, it's hard to tell. Kafka stopped and started this novel 3 times. A first attempt he destroyed in 1911 before beginning all over again, only then to lay it aside. He instead took time out to write the trial and left that unfinished to pen a final mysterious chapter the man disappeared. But this and the trial were never actually finished. This is a man, we feel, who is terrified of reaching conclusions of any sort, or terrified that there were no conclusions to reach. That the book saw publication at all is not thanks to Kafka, but to his friend and literary executor Max Brod, who gathered up all the pages to publish it under the title America with a K in 1924. By this time, Kafka was dead from tuberculosis, having famously instructed Brod to incinerate his works. Brod ignored the command, determined to bring Kafka's world to ours. Should he have betrayed his friend's wishes? What is it about this book that might justify breaking an extreme bond of trust? For playwright Ed Harris, who dramatised the novel for BBC Radio 4, the book's strength comes from a unique mix of subject and style.
This is the American dream, this is the promised land. And yet, everything that we learn about it is horrific. It's exploitative. The rich are at the top. Everything about the American machine isn't made to promote the rags to riches game. It's to crush you and crush you and crush you again. So it is a satire of the American dream. It's fun. It's a sort of Pythoness, Dickensian American plot. Beautiful and monstrous and inhospitable. Peopled by grotesques. They're not Americans. They're Hungarians and Czechs and Germans and French and Irish.
You get a good sense of the novel from its opening. As the ship makes its way into New York, passengers rush to gore upon the skyscrapers. Carl, however, doesn't. Instead, losing first his trunk and then himself in the ship's labyrinthine belly, ostensibly to search for his umbrella. Does Carl truly want to leave? To begin again? Below, Carl encounters and befriends a countryman, a hulking, aggrieved stoker. He too has been wronged, or so he claims, and so Carl takes up his cause with a passion, pleading the stoker's case in the captain's office.
It's almost like a little courtroom scene, and he becomes the stoker's attorney, maybe. We barely know Carl, but we get an impression of him being, on the one hand, very passive, sort of enthralled by the stoker, but also incredibly rhetorically skilled and really effective, and he seems to do quite well until suddenly, in the corner of the room, a man gets up and says, "This is my nephew." Carl is basically torn between two father figures. There's the stoker, whom he's really taken to in a very short time, and on the other hand, his rich uncle Jacob, who says, "This is my nephew. I already knew he was coming because the maid has written to me." And then the uncle recounts the rather humiliating seduction that Carl had to endure, and then he just whisks him away. And so the end of the chapter, Carl hasn't really set foot on American soil. They're in a little boat that takes them from the ship to the shore, and he's almost in tears, having had to leave the stoker. When he says farewell to him, he kisses his hand, and Carl thinks that he will never find another friend as dear as this stoker. Of course, it's a very clever first chapter because it already introduces this theme of loss, of having to say goodbye to stuff that you've just built up for yourself, and that's really the story of the novel. Male friendships are much more positive than any relation he will ever have with a woman in this novel.
The tension that runs through the whole novel is really introduced here. It's a tension between expectation of a classic picaresque tale a road movie in which our young protagonist will, like Charlie Chaplin, find his fortune and his girl, and the reality of an emigre who cannot leave the ship without getting caught up in a bureaucratic and physical maze. The powerful narrative motor of the quest we would expect is instead replaced by a far more subversive engine fueled by mystery and intrigue. So there's a trial, a labyrinth, an incomprehensible mystery in a strangely distorted land, a subversion of expectation of form, and a sense that maybe it all means something or nothing. In other words, this opening section of his very first novel utterly epitomizes the concept of becoming known as Esque. I'm John York, and you're listening to Open Lines, exploring Franz Kafka's first novel, A Man Who Disappeared. When you find him does leave the ship under the protection of his rich uncle, Carl is installed on the top floor of a large apartment, with a bath as big as a room and a view from his balcony of vast modernity rushing by.
In the morning and in the evening and at night in his dreams, this street was filled with constant bustling traffic, which, seen from above, seemed like a continually self-replenishing mixture of distorted human figures and of the roofs of all sorts of vehicles, constantly scattered by new arrivals, out of which there arose a new, stronger, wilder mix of noise, dust, and smells.
Carl is being trained to help his uncle's business. English lessons, writing lessons, introductions to men of power, and the smart set. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what follows is a strangely beautiful kind of panic attack of supreme awkwardness and misunderstanding. Through incomprehension and a complete inability to make his voice heard, Carl finds himself punished and cast out into the dark night. He hits the road and finds himself, like any picaresque hero, the subject of a series of episodic misadventures. He's fleeced on a road trip by two rogues who relieve him of everything, including his freedom. There's a chance to climb the rungs of the American dream as a left boy in a mad, whizzing hotel before once again he is unjustly removed. Servitude beckons, waiting on the hands and chubby feet of a monstrously large sinner, possibly a prostitute called Brunelda. Carl is, in effect, a helpless man-child buffeted by adult desires and intentions. A classic quest structure typically involves learning and change. Carl's odyssey should end with wisdom and maturity, but this is Kafka. Caroline Duttlinger.
Given that Carl is such a young boy, we very much expect this to be a kind of journey for him where by the end he's grown up, he's matured emotionally, sexually, and so on. Overall, I think there's very little in the sense of development and progress. It's more either a cyclical thing which just repeats experiences and he never seems to learn because he's just incredibly naive and trusting. We do root for him, but I think he is very, very frustrating as well because you just think, don't do that, don't go with him. But what's interesting here is, of course, that he is in a sense the perfect son who does his best, tries to fit in, makes an effort. And what the novel maybe shows you is, no, you shouldn't be like that. Don't be the good boy. Don't do what everyone wants you to do. Just try to stand up for yourself. But I think if that's the lesson, we learn it in the negative. We don't learn it from Carl.
Soon, the book fragments. Carl's fate still perilous but unresolved. We last glimpse him heading west by train. A cold wind blows ominously as he peers out at the mountainous landscape. Carl is lost in America, and perhaps lost to himself. I'm John York. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Opening Lines. The reader was Jack Clough. It was produced by Mark Berman and is a peer production for BBC Radio 4. All the episodes so far are available on BBC Sounds, where you can also subscribe to the series.
And our new dramatisation of The Man Who Disappeared is coming up after the news.
The UK general election on BBC Radio 4. News, interviews and analysis in the lead-up to polling day. You're listening to Today on BBC Radio 4.
This is Broadcasting House. I'm Paddy O'Connell. Hello.
Welcome to the World at One. With added insight and expertise from newscast and when it hits the fan.
I see some core messages and I see them being used again and again and again.
And join me, Andy Zaltzman, and my guests as we canvass for laughs from this week's events in the news quiz.
the 2024 general election. Complete coverage on BBC Radio 4.
And during the campaign, to make sure you're right up to date, Adam Fleming and Laura Koonsberg will be presenting newscasts live at 11 o'clock on Saturdays. And if you don't feel as informed as you might do on some of the details, Understand the UK election continues on weekday afternoons at 1:45 here on Radio 4.
BBC News at 3 o'clock. Dozens of countries have ended a conference in Switzerland that's being seen as a first step on the road to peace in Ukraine. The final communique hopes to put pressure on Russia to accept a plan to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity. From the summit, Sarah Rainsford reports.
That Baltic communique, the final statement from this lakeside summit, reaffirms Ukraine's territorial integrity, underlines the need for a just and lasting peace, and calls for practical steps, including a mutual and total return of all prisoners. But several countries who were here, including Saudi Arabia and Mexico, didn't sign it. Even so, speaking for the US, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called the summit a tremendous success. The aim, ultimately, is to make the plan sketched out here the only one on the table, and something Russia is under pressure to accept. For now, though, there is no sign of that.
The Israeli military says it's pausing fighting along one of the main roads into southern Gaza for several hours a day to help with the delivery of humanitarian aid. Israel's defense minister is to visit Washington in the coming days to discuss President Biden's recent ceasefire plan. The Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has admitted he wanted his party's manifesto to be more ambitious on social care reform. But he said if Labour won the election, it would carry out a review of health and social care policies. The Conservatives said his comments showed that Labour wanted to spend more by trying to taxes. Police in the German city of Hamburg have shot a man wielding an axe near a fan zone for Dutch football supporters ahead of that opening Euro 24 match against Poland. Officers also used pepper spray to try to control the man, who is understood to have been severely injured. The original multicoloured dance floor, where John Travolta danced to the Bee Gees in the 1970s film Saturday Night Fever, is sold at auction for the equivalent of more than £250,000. The auctioneer said the dance floor had stolen the show. BBC News.
Now, as part of Radio 4's celebration of the works of George Orwell and Franz Kafka, a new adaptation of Kafka's unfinished novel, The Man Who Disappeared. After a family scandal, the young immigrant Carl Bosman is dispatched by his parents to seek his fortune in America.
And while the crowd closed in on the senator to clap his back and shake his hand, and the thief hastens away to try his luck someplace else, maybe we can ask young Carl Rosberg, last American hero, what he's thinking. Carl.
Well, that's America.
Jacob's Tower, from which we can see everything and nothing. We settle to preen our wings.
This entire story is for me? Uncle, it's like a fairy tale.
Yes.
And the piano. Goodness. Is it in tune?
I don't know. Did they come in tune?
Did you... how did you know I was arriving?
Before any of that, Carl, first, my advice to you, as it is to any European first stepping foot in America, sure.
Sorry?
Seagull. My advice is not to become entangled in anything. Like a newly summoned spirit at a seance, you will not understand a single thing you see. You needn't expect compassion from those who summoned you.
This view, Uncle. This balcony is bigger than my parents' old house. Imagine sleeping here under the stars.
On a balcony? Like a hobo? No, no, no. This is precisely what I mean by entanglement. The number of fresh immigrants who, transfixed by the views, become lost souls, Carl, trapped on their balconies, staring into the abyss below. They are as ghosts, Carl. Ghosts.
Right.
And so, henceforth, Carl made a mental note to abstain from the temptation of balconies.
Uncle Jacob, I wish only to live decently and honorably in this, the land of the free.
Carl, seriously, I have arranged for you to be instructed in the ways of American language. Your tutor begins this afternoon.
The tutor? The piano? How did you know I was coming, Uncle?
Your parents wrote me a couple of begging letters I didn't read. Tawdry, badly spelled things that I had my secretary burn.
Ah.
But then I heard from your housekeeper, Miss Brummer. What an extraordinary woman.
Yes.
She told me everything. That your parents threw you out like an unhousebroken Tom, and why we entered into quite the correspondence. In fact, do you want to see?
Not particularly, Uncle.
You owe this tremendous woman your life.
Yes.
Without her, I never found you. She's 20 years your senior, isn't she?
That woman is my enemy.
Nonsense. Please, keep the letters, but keep them hidden. Your incident must never come to light. This will be your tutor now. Don't spend too long on the balcony, Carl. Remember your oath to be decent and hygienic.
Honorable, Uncle.
Honorable. As you will.
I've been living in New York for 2 months now, but I still haven't so much as hanged a picture on the wall.
Not quite. I hope the picture.
Okay.
If you want hanged, maybe it's Luce and I went into the woods and hanged the outcast for un-American behavior.
Oh.
Hung the painting, hanged the outcast. Now you're doing swell. What else can you tell me?
Senator Edward Jacob is in the business of distribution. He organizes...
You're doing just fine.
Yes, thank you. He organizes the distribution of parts by vehicle to the assembly line of a manufacturing conglomerate.
You're doing great.
He, thank you, employs over 10,000 workers. I shall tell you about some. His telephone exchange is bigger than the whole telegraph office in Prague.
You see the girls in those booths? Those steel braces round their heads fix a telephone to each ear, leaving both hands free for note-taking.
I see one woman resting her arm on the table as if inexplicably heavy. Her fingers twitch like something dying. Uncle Jacob owns 17 warehouses.
This warehouse, my boy, is my latest acquisition. It gives us the capacity to move total over 120 US tons of cargo a day.
In his business, no one says hello or goodbye. Niceties eat up precious seconds.
Profits have soared 23%.
Yard,
Rail up 13%. Blacks, dock.
yes,
Road up 8%. Automobile parts.
fine.
Dock is demand meeting with regard to unionization.
If they wanted unions, they should have stayed in Italy or Ireland or wherever the hell communism's from. Fire 100 men.
Senator.
200 men.
Yes, Senator Jacob.
As he shouts, I watch 12 men struggling with a shipping truck on a pulley. It swings to and fro before becoming detached from its harness and... Uncle, is that man alright? God.
No unions.
Yes, Senator.
The wooden truck,
Crate?
the crates collapsed on the docker.
Really? You're doing really well.
A crowd tried to free him.
Wonderful.
His life hung by a thread. Yeah, but
Yes, but hanged with a noose. My friends and I went out into the woods and...
I wanted to help him, but I was told it was a bad idea.
By who?
Mr. Green.
And who is Mr. Green?
Mr. Green is a slick, sweltering, gargantuan man with a neck like dripping butter and hands like bunches of gorillas. Uncle Jacob had introduced Mr. Green like an unveiling, his assistant in all matters, confidant, business associate. In response, Mr. Green had parked his colossal shoes on Carl's desk, licked something threateningly enormous and Cuban, and asked,
Rossman, my man, do you ride?
Mr. Green draws spectators wherever he goes. Passers-by become onlookers, onlookers well-wishers, and well-wishers backslappers, caps flapping in the engorged New York sun. Even the horses, dreary statues before his arrival, suddenly buck, roar, and blaze.
I've been meaning to ask,
Yes?
what brought you here?
To America. My parents thought it better if I started afresh somewhere.
Yes. I know that, but there's something else, isn't there? I hear skeletons rattling in closets.
No, Mr. Green. I promise you.
No secret shame?
Damn it.
Try again.
Oh, that was terrible.
Once more.
Oh, damn it.
Goddamn! Just that. What did your tutor teach you? Goddamn!
Goddamn!
Better. Now back off before the humiliation sets in. You realize throwing yourself off your horse won't save you. You're the boy my buddy Jacob's been spending every hour with for the past 2 months. Everyone's got a secret horror in their past, and trading horrors is how the top set wrangles alliances. Cigar?
And true to his word, Mr. Green attempted, from various sporting and cigar benefacting angles, to monologue Carl into submission. Over cocktails.
Private chain is a rite of passage. Is it financial?
No.
Homosexual?
No.
Masturbatory?
Mr. Green, please.
Incest? Does it break one of the 10 commandments?
I shan't tell you.
Oh, you will. Cigar.
Walking on the docks, in the shadow of the goddess of liberty, sword aloft.
Did you kill a man, Curly Boy? Did you chop him up and eat him?
Absolutely, categorically not.
Cigar.
In Carl's private chambers.
Mr. Green!
Just tell me, is there a body and was it found? And I'll give you enough of my private horrors to see you into combat.
Fine.
You'll tell me.
In the living room, the desk with all the drawers, top left, the keys under the toilet.
And Mr. Green's hulking frame squeezes back out of the bathroom and lumbers toward the desk. Carl watches him retrieve the string-bound bundle of letters from the drawer.
May I have that cigar now? Mr. Green?
The thing.
Carl, a little defeated amongst the bubbles and Texas bluebonnet-scented theme, watches Mr. Green through the open door. Someone the size of a plantation disappearing into sky-blue smoke, absorbed inextricably in the letters from the Rossman family housekeeper concerning Master Carl Rossman.
Did you turn me one? Mr. Green?
Welcome to the McAlpine restaurant. Yes, terribly busy tonight. Allow me to take your coat this way. May I introduce you to your co-diners this evening? Mr. Rossman. You may not recognize a splendid new suit. Senator Jacob. And, of course, you've met. Everyone's met. Mr. Green. They have already begun and they are discussing business. Yes, sir.
You're narrating or serving? Perfectly cool.
That's me. Boy.
Local notice from the Appalachian Mountains to Frisco. You been to Frisco, Carl?
Wow, all that way.
You're goddamn right, Carl. Each car, capacity for 140 U.S. tons. With up to 130 cars of freight, that's 16,800 tons. U.S.
That sounds like a lot.
You're goddamn right, that's a lot. That's 12,000 buffalo, or 210,000 ewes. You ever been to Frisco, Carl?
No, my feet have barely touched the sidewalks of New York. But one day...
Champagne, sir.
Oh, well, why, I never, but, thank you.
Shipping crates, baling crates, travel frames, plywood, heat-treated timber, combi boxes made from eastern white pine with a replacement cost $1.50 a piece. Keep it filled.
Of course, sir.
Agreed. Got it down to 35 cents. Excuse me a moment, gentlemen. Nature calls. Yes, sir. Rossman.
Ooh, my nose. Oh, the fizz. Yes, Mr. Green.
Young Master Rossman.
Mr. Green?
Oh, Jacob's new little
We haven't spoken since yesterday. I let you read my uncle's correspondence with Frau Brumer. I suppose I'm anxious your opinion of me may have...
Forgotten already?
Oh, well, that's very nice of you, but...
You know I have a magnificent daughter. Your age.
Oh, I'm sure if she has half your charisma and a tenth of your intellect, Mr. Green, she must be a very wonderful...
Wonderful? Wait till you see her. Silk, rhinestones, pearls, Georges Delaye, Coco Chanel, Jacques Toussaint. 16 hands high, without shoes, doesn't smoke, hair by Antoine de Paris. A marvelous, marvelous girl.
Marvelous. About the letters, Mr. Green, I hope you...
Name's Clara.
Sorry?
You should visit me. You're gonna like Clara.
And, thrown by the monolithic Mr. Green's sudden, seeming impenetrability, Carl spends the rest of the evening trying to duck the man's cigar smoke, which constantly finds its way back to him.
Like a noose.
Carl muses.
Mr. Rossman, good morning. Why are you standing there?
I'm your maid?
Yeah, but...
I'm sorry to disturb you. I'm afraid it's Senator Jacob. As no doubt you know already, Senator Jacob has 10 offices in this building alone. After trying 9 of them, Carl Rossman finds his uncle. Senator Jacob reclines in his leather throne, exchanging, apparently, no words at all with Mr. Green lying back in his.
Uncle.
Carl Rossman.
Gosh, excuse me. Everyone's up so bright and early this morning.
Nonsense.
Even through his dust bowl of a hangover, Carl senses he has walked into something. The cold dew of disagreement seems to be settling on the armrests of chairs, the bindings of ledgers, the shirt sleeves of businessmen.
Mr. Green has come to take you, as was expressed, I believe, at dinner last night, to his place outside the city.
Oh, I didn't realize you meant today.
Why, he's had so many invitations since last night, he's forgotten.
Not wishing to be disagreeable, Carl tries to read his uncle's eye, but neither man is legible. They are like the silhouettes of chess pieces against the roaring blue skyline.
I thought it was just forgive me, Mr. Green, one of those things people say over champagne.
No, I don't make a drinking game out of introducing my daughter. See what a nuisance this is already, Carl. What about Miss Hickey, your tutor? Have you told her you're unavailable?
No, this is the first I've heard of any of it, Uncle. Perhaps Mr. Green, my uncle would prefer it if I stayed here.
I would prefer it if you kept me up to date with your social engagements. It's dinner, Jacob. He won't be found dead on the side of the road.
Perhaps it was 1 part champagne to 2 parts my rotten American. Mr. Green, I would be honoured, but perhaps if I may also take a rain check on your invitation.
As my sister's son, I would hope your word, whatever it is your word.
From atop the mantel clock, where the ticking's most dramatic, we can watch the confusion coming off Carl like cartoon stink lines. Carl?
Yes?
What are you thinking? Say something.
If I were to, as you seem to be suggesting, Uncle, go, then...
Absolutely, I agree. Go. Good day, gentlemen.
Unless we just postpone. Mr. Green, I don't understand what's affecting my uncle so, but...
I'll pick you up in the car tonight. Good day, Carl.
Backseat, automobile, evening. Carl toying miserably with the knees of his silk pants. Mr. Green mantled in smoke, foreign to Carl as a totem pole.
Are we, where are we?
And Carl is danced out of the car into the chestnut-lined darkness of a nouveau chateau so colossal it disappears into stars in every direction.
I'm Flora Evelyn Mildred Virginia Green. I'm your hostess. Enchanté, Daddy, did you hear that? A real European. Isn't he adorable? The piano for me.
Sure.
Oh, can we keep him, Daddy? Can we?
Only for tonight, my treasure.
I should be back in a few hours.
I'll clean out his hutch and change his straw and everything. Take my arm like a gentleman, Carl.
Yes.
Arm in arm. Isn't that nice? Now, of course, I'm very splendidly naive about such things, but does this mean you've consummated something? Your face, Mr. Rossman! Oh.
Anyone for any more?
On one side of the dining table, Mr. Green, a hand on his door, clawing, eyes flashing, lashes swooshing, ringlets bobbing in silk like gold leaf. Carl sitting opposite, alone with the billowing curtains and night sky.
Mr. Green? Do you think my uncle was annoyed at my leaving?
For myself, it's a triumph. Your uncle let you out of his sight at all.
Carl smiles vaguely through a spoonful of the amaranth velvet. Gravy.
Yahweh, Senator Jacob dotes on this little school.
He's been very good to me since my arrival.
Oh, you've barely touched your kitchen, Carl.
Tell your uncle how much
also new to me.
Yes, felt wrong.
And most importantly, I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry, such awful people.
No, they're his friends.
Yes, you must be decent, honorable, and in time learn American customs.
It's exactly as he walked.
Don't get involved in anything. You must
Go now.
strokes his wrist.
Say something. But then I can show you my room.
That's extremely kind of you.
A cigar? Mr. Baskin.
She leans across the table, and the cigar is jammed in place, like a cap into the front of a snowman's head.
Please, Daddy, I'm not yours.
Well, I've had a wonderful evening. The meal was exquisite, but I really must collect my things.
I tried one of these darling milk back and forth.
No, thank you, but as you yourself said, this is a special that my uncle must let me out of his sight. My uncle is all family and had an American, so I'm said to me understand he's not keen about to take the best of his work.
The way the cars move is labyrinthine, unbelievable, snaking passageways that seem to cover deep moving on one side.
Everything is so low. This, Please. Alright. I can't see. I'm scared. Where's your hand? May I just... Laura? Laura, where are you? I nearly fell.
Not knowing what to make of this bewildering after a minute, Carl pushes her back. She tumbles backwards through a door into a brilliantly lit bedchamber, and after teetering to and fro, crashes back into a piano. Carl, passionate, follows her in. A moment later, clawing her way to her feet.
Sorry. Push me, Miss Carl.
She seizes him and softens her.
towards the abyss.
That's how a jiu-jitsu champion feels. You feel. As I said, why don't you?
Are you going to help me up?
Carl dusts himself down, looking around to see that there are no ladies in the bedroom. The dresser with mirrors, a grand piano, rugs and animal skins, and a four-poster bed with clothes.
Still good. I won't mention our little tent. There's something about this, you know?
Maybe broke my feet.
Twilight chain.
The noise. It's snakes. Clara. It's not the serpent.
Carl disappears behind an oriental screen, while Carl lays no hold on the buttons. Carl thought he was distracted by Laura's song in the corner of his eye. Laura returns from behind the screen, wearing something that she's at bum to bum on a piano stand.
Really,
I think it's only midnight.
At the time, how did that sound? The most extraordinary evening. But I must hasten to watch this place. Yes. Days that horrible.
Right.
She followed.
Doesn't look like it.
Put yourself.
Yes.
Feeling it, Carl prays and find a door out into the open air, so he can run back to tickets.
Please let me go.
The dome of a bulky wall flickers on candle.
You are going to Florida. You told me to. Let's. When did he give you? Carl Ross to be given to him at midnight wherever he is found. I am a man of principle, and as such, I did not expect this from him. I trusted him. And I held him off from the crowd. After today's incident, I have no choice but to forbid your return to my room and you never stop focusing since you did. What incident? I asked my closest ally in the life of Mr. Wayne to pass this message on. I'm certain he has some kind word for me. I hope will read that P.S. He has your precious suitcase. All I can say is, go. Leave at once and be a man. What did I do? I tried to be polite to keep him and you, his associates, happy. But Mr. Green, please, tell me. What on earth did I do? What do I do now? If it's about Clara, I did it. You did it. I don't understand.
Here's your suitcase. Mind you don't lose it again. And your kit.
I had a hat.
Traveling caps for your stuff. Third class ticket to Frisco. You've been to Frisco. Where I recommend you start at the bottom. Work your way.
Let me leave when I asked. I'd have been home long before midnight. You and Clara worked together.
At which point you take me back to the team.
You read Frau Brunner's letter. This is all told to me.
No, sir. This is your door.
But why? I'm no one. The least you can do is tell me why.
That's it. Please, thank you. Let's go.
It's all over. All I get is to shove out into the dark.
Good job, man. It's a thing to behold.
Carl blinks upward, and we with him, into the peachy gold lens flare of the sun, and the shape of two raggedy hobos leaning down into him.
Hey,
Alright, man. Good results, man.
hands off my suitcase. Variant. Yes, sorry.
Wait on our account.
Says the one with the shirt and his jacket. The other leans in, big, unblinking bug eyes that stare out of sooty buckets, and says,
Ships tonight. Snoozy bye, my friend.
under the draggled tree beside the railroad tracks, Carl stares after the two hobos through the dust and shimmering heat haze.
My name's Carl, and I'm a German.
Hey, put on that.
Shouts Bug Eyes,
Hey, French. This. Pizza. Irish.
yells Shirtless.
My American guidebook said always to be careful of Irishmen.
You've been warned, man.
Staring out before him at the dancing prairies by his feet and the glacial mountains beyond them, leading almost certainly with salmon-rich rivers, Carl is suddenly flooded with a peculiar feeling, like gold.
This is America, where every breath is adventure, every handshake and cheers, every smile, comrade.
And he scrambles to his feet after them,
Hey, comrades!
nearly forgetting his suitcase.
Oh, right. Thank you. Comrade!
Say goodbye to you, my friend.
And the men who talked to him, in the distance, the massive skyscrapers throb and ebb against the twinkling sea.
Beautiful. I'm going to say more than comrade, because as an Irishman, you probably can't help being based, but yes, it's splendid.
Suddenly, Carl's eyes swim as a monstrous truck blocks the entire view. Down inside, Edward Jacobs Cargo and Parts Distribution. And Carl. Where'd he go?
I'm hiding behind my comrades.
Hey, you boys looking for white? So, is this the Edward Jacob Cargo and Parts? Then I would rather imbibe my companion's influence than be hired by your paymaster. Hey, simple knowledge now.
Be made clean super short on one another's sweaty, hairy, tiny
You.
I thought Jacob was a great senator.
He's everything that stinks about America. An exploiter of the honest Joe. Right. You didn't fall for it, did you?
No, of course. Only ever passing through. I'm on my way to Frisco. I'm told Frisco is the place where a decent and honorable man can make his way to the top. No?
Did he eat you alive in Frisco?
Really?
I know a man who went to Frisco.
Yeah?
So many bucks. He was swindled for an inch of his life. Guided up, naked, save his boots, wrestling pigs, and selling his body for scraps outside Upside Diner.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and the here.
But
Carl stares at his little third-class ticket, flip-flapping in the breeze.
I do you a favor.
tickets.
No, thank us later. You're lucky you run into us, boy. You're under our wing.
Where will we go? What will we do for money?
Butterfield.
What's the deal?
But scratch no way up. If there's honest work for a farmhand in America, money's now. Irish Butterfield, labor will set you up. We'll teach you the rules of the road.
And as they head into the sun, Carl falling behind and catching up, Reed cut mixed us off to the Great American Montage. The three bands sing, silhouettes before an oversized sun, two bindles bobbing and a suitcase flapping. Mountains glisten like stacked crockery. Salmon bounce upstream. Oh, a graver color palette now as they trudge past smoke-black factories. Truckfuls of braying animals driven to slaughter. A mangy dog. Oh, you can see his ribs. And hungry kids in a window, all soot and snot. One of them's crying. You know this stuff, but it's not as sad as the one who's got no feeling left. The road, southwards, ever southwards, toward Butterfield. Things brighter again now. Skylarks and swallows, a rail track, a locomotive, and in the next shot our three comrades are freight hopping. Carl running alongside, exciting camera angles. They reach for him. Where's your suitcase? Dramatic shots of Carl, panting, tripping, scrambling, finally hauled aboard. And now we go to a wide shot of the train, oversized room, big screen, cinema. Montage, the only way to see America. With two comrades asleep at the other end of the boxcar, Carl finally has the opportunity to check his suitcase. It has been 2 months since he arrived in America and last opened it. And as he does so, Carl is horrified by the reek of